Hello, everybody. I hope you're having a nice day from wherever you're joining us in from. I'm Amrita, and today I'm joined by Ujan. Welcome to the first ever episode of our podcast, Let's Talk Hinduism. How are you doing, Ujan?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine too. And I'm glad to have you here for this discussion.
Great. I, Acha. so, so as you know, this is the first ever episode. We are trying something different. What do you think this podcast is going to be about?
Well, the intention, at least, is that it's going to encourage the objective study of Hinduism and help us kind of contextualize the tradition and rituals and practices of the religion and make it accessible and make that contextualization accessible to a wider public.
Yeah, I also think that is a good idea because there's an absurd amount of content on Hinduism that we just know all over the place in YouTube, in other TikTok shorts, things like that. There is a lot of content on Hinduism, but
TikTok
most of
shorts, I'm kind of like really intrigued by that's something that I didn't do of, but that's good too. That's interesting to know.
oh no, there's a lot of content, you know, where I mean TikTok's banned in India now, but basically when it was, there used to be people playing PUBG and speaking about the word of Mahabharata, things like that. There used to be a lot of stuff like that. TikTok's banned
Oh,
in India now, but YouTube
yeah.
shorts are there, and there's things like, do you know during the Mahabharata there was a nuclear weapon that only Ashwatthama knew? Basically, a lot of content, and I don't know. I mean, it's funny because the content seems to be um, absolutely all over the place in terms of how frankly ridiculous this is. And so I'm very curious to know your opinion. Why do you think we have that kind of fantastic religious content of glorious Hinduism? And
One of the reasons from the top of my mind is that there's no religious studies department in our country. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if there is a wholly dedicated religious studies. And I'm not talking about theological schools in mutts and ashrams, but I'm talking about a critical religious studies department in the universities of India. That I have found there are a lot of religious studies departments, whether it be theological schools, divinity studies, or comparative religions. Now you have a department called, I think, digital folkloristics, comparative myths. You have these kind of host of departments in other countries, and especially in the West. So you have kind of channels dedicated to more objective studies of religion in this country, and you have a structure and framework to sustain an audience that is already kind of acculturated and familiar with these kind of methods of studying religion.
I, yeah, that's very true. We don't have religious studies. I don't, I don't know. I mean, definitely not in Calcutta. Not in. I don't think in the Delhi
Maybe
schools you do.
if we do find a religious studies department, we should definitely link it somewhere here.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, but back to the fantastic comments. Like, you know, there used to be content creators who were just doing gym content, and they would suddenly shift to talking about Hinduism, and
I
and
know who you're talking
no,
about.
no. I mean, I think there is a market for Hinduism content. I think there is a market for Hinduism content. I genuinely do. I think that, but I fail to understand why people would be so obsessed in this, or have their obsession with this. The only thing they want to know about Hinduism is just how glorious it was, and pretty much nothing else about it. So here's my other sort of point that I always think. So, in the 20th century, right? Like generations of our parents and things like that, there was a lot of interesting study, not outside the academy, on Hinduism. Um, so I'm thinking, let's say there was no social media, but there were novels. So I'm thinking Iravati Karve's Jugantar. And in Bangla, we of course have Gajendra Kumar Mitra's Panchajanna, both of which retell the Mahabharat in the light of within the limits of human reason. So both of them sort of try to rationalize the events of the Mahabharata, putting the fantastical stuff out. So, I mean, the generation that preceded us were more interested in studying Hinduism within what they thought was reason. Now, that had its problems, agreed. But it wasn't like this. And so, I don't know. I don't really have an answer for what's going on.
Well, what I feel that you're saying that the language in which Hinduism was studied was markedly different from the language that's being used to kind of study it or even talk about Hinduism today.
Mm-hmm.
So the language of the 20th century was more rational, more reasonable. There was a language of reason, and it was more realistic. But today, the language is much more fantastical. And one of the reasons that I feel um, that goes to kind of like that can explain why we have more and more content in this fantastical language today is because of the dehumanization that of disciplines, the defunding of the humanities across India. So there has been a massive defunding of humanities and the rise of technological kind of disciplines, fields, the kind of the language of science, so to speak, or technology has replaced that earlier kind of language of humanistic reason. And the problem is that with we are kind of in a booming stage of technology for a very long time, in which there's massive kind of innovations in AI, and the possibilities can seem very limitless. So the language of technology inspires an imagination that maybe the drier kind of like humanistic disciplines and reality cannot sustain. So it kind of makes people, especially in a lot of Indians who are kind of in technology, kind of feel that okay, if there's technological advancement to this extent today, maybe there was a technological advancement in the ancient times, but it was just not recorded, and it creates a space for creating um, very modern innovations and very contemporary innovations and etching it on the space of past glory and achievements.
Okay, that's an interesting take. So if I understand that correctly, you're saying that because the humanities were defunded, we had a lot of tech bros doing stuff on Hinduism, and they retroactively like talking about tech in the past, and it's really a, so that's where the genesis of this problem begins.
Yeah, because you're not kind of looking at the past as it is, or you're not kind of reading the past from what is available to you from the past, but you're etching your own kind of contemporary aspirations and desires onto a time that has already elapsed. So it kind of creates this distorted elliptical notion of time
Hmm. No, yeah.
where the past and the contemporary kind of days exist kind of side by side parallelly, but you don't have actually them meeting any time because it's impossible for these two different, different, distinct time periods to collapse. And that is the space of imagination, and that is the space of all this fantastical writing, all these fantastical claims.
No, I think, okay, so I think part of it is you nail the hammer on the head with a the defunding of the humanities, and I think in the past, 15 years, most people we hear writing about Hinduism are people from the tech industry, so to speak, like bankers, engineers, like bankers, not tech, but you get the gist.
I think
Doctors.
the word that a lot of these people like to use that they are professionals as
Hmm.
opposed to generals.
Yeah.
That's the word that they like to use.
And interestingly, that's how the academic disciplines in India are divided in the undergraduates, right? So you have the general disciplines and then you have the professional disciplines. And I think I one thing that did occur to me as I was thinking about this sort of boom in writing about Hinduism is also because academics don't engage with public discourse, bar a few, and it's not possible for academics to all the demands of the academy and then engage with the public. So there is that. I don't remember any academics in the past also. I cannot imagine Joguna Thapar coming and engaging with public. But I do imagine Joguna Thapar did get into, or people like Sukumar Sen and all did get into debates with the public. So,
Yeah, it's not right to assume that academics don't want to engage with the public, or it's a two-way street. There's so much of poison about going on in the system about what the academic study of religion entails, and there's so much made about the geopolitical kind of funding and the um, tukre gang, the breaking India forces and stuff, that it makes it difficult for any academic to have that conversation. And sometimes I wish, I wish they would have looked at how much money an academic does get for conducting their research, and they would know that there is nothing involved in for an academic to kind of distort facts and kind of say things like that, because nobody's paying us. If nobody's paying us, and that's that does not even kind of cut the ethical dimensions of the discipline and all the methodological training, but nobody's paying us to do that. But somehow there's this kind of conversation that has gone out in the public that people are paid merchants or something, and it makes that kind of dialogue or multi-log with the public very difficult.
yeah, we can have an entire episode on this academic distrust of religion. I will say one thing that one reason to disagree, I mean, one reason where this comes is at least there has been histories of academics being involved with government institutions and then being paid by the government to do researches during Cold War. So, and I do understand what. Okay, this is a topic for another day. I'm really thinking of all the anthropological scandals that have gone on.
Yeah,
That
but
have.
yeah. Well, it's kind of easier to do in certain disciplines than others, but I have not heard about scandals in history like this, so I cannot, or religious studies for that matter. But
Yeah.
I think that, yeah, but definitely this is something that warrants a lot of conversation. But moving on, I do feel there is a need to create a space in which we can have a multi-log rather than a dialogue with people across disciplines,
Hmm.
and weigh in with our own kind of methodological training and our own kind of objective study and contextualization of religion. I do think that it's important that people get to hear another perspective and another point of view, which might not be very well represented at this moment, right?
In the public, at least, yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Okay. So, what are we talking today? So, we did like a good 30-minute intro for what the channel is about.
Yeah.
But,
We need to
okay.
cut it down.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah. Today we'll be discussing about our famously infamous historian of ancient India. It's Romila Thapar. She'd be 91
mhm.
right now, I guess, but she's still very much at the center of all the controversies. And there's a recent controversy about
Yes.
one of her
Let's.
article. I don't think that the article was written on her, but it was one of her speeches that Quint wrote an article on, and it's on the dating of the Mahabharata. And now, John, I know that you kind of got into a bit of a fire about speaking about this too on Twitter.
Nah, you make it, it was nothing. Um, Okay, so I'll say a bit about this. So this is like an old thing. It's a video clip, sort of a 1 minute clip from a 1 hour long speech from 2019 at some point that went viral. And then in 2019, a lot of media channels picked this up. So what you see in your screen is from the Quint. Um, I'll put the link below in the YouTube description of the video. So what happened was, she made a comment that Yudhiṣṭhira's. Let me read out what she said. Right? She made this comment. You can see the video. You can see the lecture. I'll read out what she said. This is from the Quint. Thapar raises the point, and I quote: Thapar raises the point that in Buddhist texts, Ashoka is celebrated as an emblem of peace, non-violence, and tolerance. The figure was then later picked up by Nehru and turned into an emblem of New India. However, in Brahminical texts, he is listed merely as a modern ruler. She then points out how, contrary to popular belief, some historians in recent past have been arguing for the presence of Buddhist ideas in the epic, Mahabharata. Thapar then highlights Yudhiṣṭhira's struggle in the Shanti Parva, the 12th of the 18 books of the Indian epic. Sharing a struggle common with Ashoka, Yudhiṣṭhira has to pick between kingship and renunciation. This, Thapar points out, can be traced in Buddhist ideas of power versus renunciation. This is all she said, okay, in 2019. Now, this was clipped.
Okay, wait up a minute. So if this article was written in 2019, why is it that in 2023 we're kind of having a controversy? That's relatively old for an article to be talked about 4 years on,
Yeah,
right?
so what happens is, so this happened in 2019, right? The lecture was in 2019. When the lecture clip went viral in 2019, people wrote about it. Like, so the Quint wrote about it, and the other sort of Op India, Swaraj, all the right-wing websites also picked up on it to say how Thapar was wrong, etc. And then the controversy died down. Every time something about Romila Thapar trends, the prominent handles of the Indian right, they circulate this clip to make fun of how misguided she is. Now, so a few days back, So a few days back, she was supposed to give, Romila Thapar was supposed to give a lecture at the IIC in Delhi, India International Center. I could be wrong, but I think that's what happened. And then some BJP leaders asked Thapar's thing to be cancelled. This caused a furor in Twitter, as it does most of the times. And when it did, this clip was recirculated again. And then again, the same handles came out, started saying how Thapar has no idea about Indian history. She thinks Yudhiṣṭhira, so she thinks that Yudhiṣṭhira is a figure after Ashoka, which would never be correct because Mahabharata is so old. And also, Thapar is a cipher to diss broadly on historians of ancient India who have absolutely no connection with, are completely in disconnect with the wider history of Hindus. So that's what happened, and then of course people go back and forth, as is always the case with these things, and so we know that the right wing traditionally dates the Mahabharata war to be from 3062 or 26, some absurd number of the BCE. There are people who date it to 5000. There are people who date it beyond. And so that's, before I get into further sort of wrong, convoluted alleys. This is the sort of crux of the story.
So, what were some of the reactions that kind of were more popular in the viral thoughts this time to this article?
So the basic thing was, the right's basic argument is this. Okay, the Mahabharata war happened in 3026 BCE, and for the Indian right, the Mahabharata is a salient. That was a Freudian slip of the greatest record. It's a salient inscription and a transparent inscription of the events that had happened. That's the right's position. And they date it based on the fact that they calculate the Kali Yuga to begin, which is said to have started of the Mahabharata war, in somewhere in the 3000 lines. 3026 BC or 3062 BC, I don't know. But basically, the argument is Ashoka is a character in 237 BC or whatever, years after the war had happened, after Yudhisthira had gone to heaven or most likely hell. So the right's argument is Yudhishthira had died long before Ashoka. So how can Ashoka inspire somebody like Yudhishthira who's dead so long? So it's all sort of lame sarcasm against the discipline of history and Thapar, and so this is the crux of their argument. So I'm curious to know what you think. What do you think of this whole dating debacle?
What I feel is that it's a part of a larger debate on the dating of the epic, and it has been a debate that has kind of lasted throughout much of the 19th and the 20th century, so much of the colonial period. And I think that it has its genesis from the kind of German ideological trainings in the country. And I don't know who made this point, but I think that it's a very good point that about the German ideological kind of fascination with finding the origins of an uncorrupted text, which kind of comes again from finding the core uncorrupted Bible, drove much of the scholarship of this period. And so there is a need, and there are efforts being put in to find an uncorrupted, a source, an original part of the epic. And additions that are later kind of built upon are seen as the corrupted kind of interpolations. And interpolations, by interpolations, we mean insertions or additions that were not that were not part of the original canon. And what happens is that you have a main text that was written long time back. This idea that main text was written long time back, and there are additions that are kind of made into the text in order for it to kind of reach a gargantuan proportion. So there were a lot of views about the war being one of the original layers, the Soptic Parva, the war being one of the original layers of the epic, and also the narrative sections of the epic being part of the original layer, and whatever the didactic sections are parts that came about later. And most of the scholars, they give a composition kind of range for the epic to be of 1,000 years for this reason, because it was kind of built upon in layers and layers. And I think you were mentioning before we started speaking about the case of Vidur.
Oh yeah. It's my favorite example.
And the story of Vidur, and how you can kind of like see this layer building kind of a process through the epic, through the character of Vidur.
So this is of course Van Butenen's argument, not mine, who says that there are several layers in the Mahabharata that you can actually locate. So for example, so the Vidur's case is very interesting. So Vidur comes up as a person who's born as Dharma, apparently, and then there is this problem that if he's Dharma, if he's so nice, why can't he ever be king? And what explains the fact that he can never get kingship? And so there's another layer added to that text later to justify that by saying, oh, Dharma did something bad once, so he was cursed that he's going to born like this so that he cannot do this. And you can see these layers sort of pretty much in most of these texts where like a motif of the curse or something else was introduced, and then to make later some of the texts that have survived earlier make sense of what's happening. I think there are several, cannot remember one more on the top of my head, but Vidur is one example, as is let me think,
And this is something, it's interesting because we also kind of like see a similar trend in Ramayana, but then it kind of like happens across renditions because there's so many renditions of the epic. So it kind of happens from the Sanskrit to the regional renditions. And W.L. Smith, who's
Hmm.
no more now, I think passed away some time back, he had a similar point about additions being made to the larger canon to explain the inconsistencies in the Sanskrit text.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah, you have the killing of Valin episode being one of the uh, most kind of added upon and commented upon kind of episode in the Ramayana, where
yeah.
you have later moral explanations why, and later on you do also kind of have Valin being kind of given the opportunity of asking for his life back, but then him denying that, so it kind of further legitimizes and kind of is like it kind of absolves Ram of any kind of wrong he could have committed in killing him from behind the tree. I kind of see a similarity between the kind of approaches in the across the epic, but I think what makes it further complex in the case of Mahabharata is that it's kind of happening within the text itself. That you
Mhm.
have a lot of these additions being made. So
By
what
the
does
time
that?
the yeah,
Yeah, and what does that do
and also the
to the
Mahabharata, like,
consistency of the text? Yeah, but yeah.
yeah, and also the Mahabharata has a the southern recension of the Mahabharata is far bigger. It sort of what's the word for it? It further sort of adds stories, events to rationalize things that don't make sense. Um, so I want to talk about. I don't want to talk about it, for it will take forever. But Subhadra's abduction in the northern recension is just small, and Arjuna does not fight anybody there, and um, but in the southern recension, this entire episode is interpolated, extended to 500 plus verses to show that how he's this valorous fighter and is not somebody who steals and goes like Ravana, but rather is somebody who goes and fights the Yadava army and etc. etc. But so yeah, so interpolation, yes, has
So
been there.
this is something that kind of like brings us to a very fundamental question that um, compositions evolve and change over time,
Hmm.
and we cannot kind of we cannot take them as truth value of events that have actually transpired because then
Hmm.
what is closer to truth? And should we kind of entertain even questions of the truth value of events through compositions that have been built over at least the manuscripts that we have received and which forms informs the canon of Mahabharata today? They have been rewritten many times,
Hmm.
and I'm sure that if I kind of like tell you something today and you were to write it down maybe 2 days afterwards, or even if you write it down now and someone else copies that from you maybe a week or a month or a year afterwards, there is going to be some change in that composition and the words that I have said to you. So, what does that mean when you have a text that's being written, rewritten, said, recounted, and kind of received over time? And is
Hmm.
it so unnatural to kind of like think that they will not carry the weight of the time in which they are being kind of put down to a manuscript form?
No, okay. So this brings back me to the fundamental question. Let's us get back to Thapar. So here, so this is something Thapar wrote in 2009. Okay, this is called War in the Mahabharata. This came out in the MLA's, the PMLA, the Modern Language Association. Um, their journal. So here Thapar makes a very interesting point, and that has been like that German Indology point aside, there is broadly a consensus, and I mean whatever you make of it. This is Thapar's own point, right? And of course, people will rage about the wrong things. So let me open what she says. So I'm reading it out, right? She says, the date of the battle remains controversial. It could have occurred in the early first millennium BC, since there are references to places and persons in the composition that period that corresponds to those in the epic. Archaeological excavations of the sites mentioned suggested that they were well settled at that time. By they, it means the the clan of the Kurus. And doubtless, conflict over territory was not unusual. The epic was probably composed later and looked back at past times, which is characteristic of epic forms. Historical analysis of the present recension, keyword here is recension, the present recension suggests a period between 400 BCE and 200 AD, and this includes the many interpolations, the revisions, although even this date range is not unanimously accepted. And she cites Sukhthankar, our editor of the critical edition of the Mahabharata done by Bori. Okay, so here's my point, right? Generally, right, if you get all the noise of social media out and everything out, there was always a consensus, somewhat a consensus, that there is some kernel of historical truth in the Mahabharata, as is there in the Ramayana, as is there in all literary epics. They were not made in vacuum. There is some kernel of truth, and even beyond German Indology, that kernel of truth is present in parts and pieces, like the Khandov Dahan being, I think, the kernel being the second urbanization story.
Yeah.
The new tools, for burning of forests. It's so symptomatic of what was happening in second urbanization, right? But at any rate, there is some.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
I'm sorry to kind of like interrupt
go.
you, but I just kind of like came across a quote that day from, I don't know, from one of the kind of religion podcast channels, and it did say that myth is something that kind of leaves a register on the collective memory, though even it does not appear in the historical record. And what you're so articulately saying, that it's making me think of. Yeah, but continue on. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that so there is some kernel of truth in the Mahabharata, right? Which and that truth is not that Duryodhana and Yudhisthira were two actual people who fought, but that kernel of truth, I think, is that there were battle over territories between clans, and there may or may not have been some bloodshed about it, and there was a ballad, oral tradition, there was some ballad about that war. This part I don't think anybody would disagree, right? It's very hard to disagree that there is some truth to that part of the story. Now, they were probably not Duryodhan and Yudhisthir, and there was probably not a guy named Bhim and Arjun, but there were people who fought over territory during this period. And they were probably brothers too. So, they were very closely knit clans who fought. So that part I think is fair. And there was a ballad that either romanticized the victory of the Pandavas, or alternatively, as one maverick view suggests, the ballad was originally a ballad for the Kauravas. But whatever it is, there was an oral tradition that recounted the war and the devastation it brought. Okay. Now, even Thapar, now this is interesting, Thapar too agrees that the war event may or very likely is first millennium BCE. The great patriarch of right-wing civilizational archaeology, Bibi Lal, even he says very clearly, squarely, that it's somewhere around, he pushes a bit for the 1200 plus or something BC, but there is some truth to that, right? Now the question is, when is the epic composed? And it's not composed when the war happened, right? People were not writing then. And the concerns of the epic, primarily the obsession with dharma and how to follow or not follow it, it's most likely not part of the original tale of the loss and devastation of the war. Now, when the epic is composed, which is what I think Thapar is correct, 400, 500 BCE, definitely after the Buddha, all the way till 200 plus BCE. And I don't think that we should confuse the original recounting of a devastation of war with what eventually becomes the Mahabharata. And what eventually becomes the Mahabharata is a response to the growing challenges that Brahmanism faces from 400 BC onwards, primarily the Mauryan heterodoxy, the Shramana tradition, and that's why renunciation is such like a theme that the epic struggles with. But okay, so I'll not go into that. But the basic point is, when the epic is composed to be a didactic element, when it's supposed to speak about, because there are parts on the epic that absolutely valorizes things that at no point can be considered ethically sound. But when it becomes a religious text, it's about dialectic. When Brahmanism is fighting Buddhism, I don't see why it's so strange to have to believe that parts of Buddhism, Buddhist ideas, Brahmanism was in competition with, or let's say in collaboration with. We don't know that. And those there is an interplay that influences something like the Mahabharata, which God knows how many people wrote, right? People kept adding things. Everybody and their nan added things in the Mahabharata. So I don't see why this is such an unbelievable thing.
Yeah,
But yes.
I actually kind of feel that this concern, this kind of hurt that something so natural uh, that, like there was a shared cultural milieu and it would kind of have some traces. This is so unthinkable today, especially because I feel it's because of the contemporary and kind of views about purity and contamination and the making and, expression of a larger Hindu identity. So that kind of plays more of an influence than whether actually Buddhism impacted the book or not, which is it's not very unnatural for something to have that influence, given that it was one of ancient India's kind of like largest cultural exports. So I don't feel that it was necessarily something that could be denied. But why is it hurting certain sections of the people so much today? That is a more relevant a conversation, I feel, to a large extent. And I feel the answer lies in the idea that the influence of non-Hindu religions, especially Buddhism, which was in direct contestations, even though it did kind of collaborate and kind of share ideas, there was kind of also discourses and borrowing of ideas and exchanges between Brahmanism and Buddhism. But today we kind of have this legacy of Buddhism being very anti-Brahmanical, and the influence of that kind of contaminating a text that certain sections believe to be a Hindu heritage. What do you think about that?
Okay, wait. So I don't think I got that entirely. So you're saying, if I'm correct, that Buddhism's presence is not in itself very unlikely, but because Hindu, let's call it for what it is, and Hindutva now sees Buddhism as its one of its primary antagonists. It sees the presence of Buddhism in what is a Hindu heritage a matter of contamination.
Yes, that's
Okay.
exactly. I that's much better put than whatever I was
No, no,
trying
no,
to
no.
get at.
I was trying. No, no, no. I think you have a point. Okay, so let me ask you this then, right? If, okay, somebody would say that this is a Jain idea influencing the Mahabharata and not a Buddhist idea. This renunciation comes from Jainism and not from Buddhism. If somebody were to say that, let's say if Thapar would have said that, do you think that we would have the same outrage?
So my broader point would be that no, and I think that there was this one contestant in Indian matchmaking who kind of put it much more
Let me put that.
relevantly than I would have ever
Wait.
put it, and more kind of rashly. Maybe I just kind of like put it
I'm
here.
gonna put that up on the stream. Okay, go ahead, say.
Yeah, but I don't think it would be that much of a problem. The problem is that um, the contemporary lens is very much determined by the geopolitical constructs of the modern nation state. So each modern nation state has its own kind of heritage, its own religion, its specific culture that it doesn't share with anyone else. And the fact that Buddhism is a religion that has been taken up by many countries in East and Southeast Asia makes it particularly problematic to just claim it as a heritage. And from in much of the early modern medieval time, Buddhism declined in many parts of India. So if they do kind of like if people who are particularly concerned with ideas of purity and with this kind of absolutist notion of geopolitics in which there's one religion for each country or so, if they were to kind of like give credit to a religion that has grown out of India but kind of has been co-opted by other nation state, then it would kind of take away from the heritage that they are trying to kind of build as an exclusive essentialist identity. I don't know whether I'm making a lot of sense, but and that's what I'm trying to get at.
Okay, so I was trying to find the meme and it almost popped up in OBS, so I'll change that in editing. But apparently, it says somebody said, Jains, what are that? And somebody says it's Hinduism but on steroids. Yeah.
Not my words, not my words.
No, no, no. Of course not. Okay, so I think we are where are we? We are now on 50 plus minutes. So let me ask you one last question. Let's do last two, something like that, and then we can call it a day.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So outside the noise, right? Outside all this social media noise and everything. Academically speaking, right? In terms of objectively, uh, you are interested in you have done a considerable work on renunciation in the Upanishads, and you have read on that. What's your take on this? Do you think that Yudhishthira's renunciation is inspired by um, a dichotomy between Buddhist kingship and renunciation, or do you think it's a response to Buddhist ideas of renunciation?
Firstly, kind of, I feel that even in Buddhism, there's a lot of kind of a difference in what renunciation should consist of, and where you have different schools of thoughts and stuff. So I don't want to essentialize anything, but I just feel that it is not very improbable that a text which is being composed in a cultural milieu in which you have so many dominant kind of influences to retain some influences, from a widespread religion of that period.
Okay, I think, yeah, yeah, I
But
don't,
I
yeah.
should ask this question to you, and since you have taken so much of heat on that matter from Twitter recently, even though you try to shrug it off, but I want I want to ask you two questions really. What is your take on this entire controversy? And secondly, what do you feel? Why are people so emotional about things such as this? What is driving them? And a lot of people are not kind of like part of, maybe they do not have very strong political affiliations. But what kind of like, what bursts their bubble, or, what hurts them so much if the Mahabharata is dated in a post-Buddhist, as a post, if the Mahabharata is dated as a post-Buddhist composition?
Okay, so let's,
And I
that's,
would, yeah, maybe you should share some of the kind of heat and the dirt that you got.
nah, I,
That'd be amazing. Yeah.
okay, first of all, that's barely a Twitter fight, right? A Twitter fight is something that, that's not anything. So some people reacted to that because I said that there is every chance of this text being a post-Buddhist text. So okay, so my first, I don't know about ancient Indian history of renunciation and that part of the historiography like you do. So I don't have any um, personal primary source reading of that. So I know what I know from secondary sources, and I read the book that it's old, but I highly still recommend. It's Govind Upadhyay's Brahmanas in Ancient India, some version of that. And there he says that the Mahabharata is that in the post-Vedic world, with the challenges that the theological reconstruction of the Mahabharata, because of the challenges they faced from Buddhism, Shamanas, and the Mauryan heterodoxy in general, the Mauryas gaining political power, etc., causes very deep anxieties in the Brahminical world. And those anxieties are recorded in a Mahabharata, right? Now, this text is dated. Some of it may or may not be correct, some of the research may or may not be correct. But I think it holds value based on my reading of Upadhyay, and I did not read the Upanishads to really do that. It's not what I work on. But I will say this. I think if you have read about comparative religion, or if anybody who has taken your religion 101 and stuff like that, you would know that the Mahabharata records ample amount of desire from the Vedic world to incorporate deities that are not Vedic, and that's just true, because and that's the case with the Krishna, and we should have a separate podcast on whether the Krishna was in the Mahabharata, how Bhagavatism developed separately outside the Vedic world, and how that assimilation sort of happened, or was attempted at the very least. So I think the Mahabharata is an attempt, or records, let's not say attempt, records Brahminical anxiety and their attempts to capture various other religions within this broad umbrella. And that comes from a challenge through facing the Shramana influence. This is Upadhyay's point. I think there is value to it, there is merit to it. So that's my position on that part of this question. Now, your second question is, I don't really have an answer to that, which is that why is it that it bothers them so much? It's funny, because it's well accepted that the Ramayana's original text is Buddhist, right? But nobody seems to have a real problem with that. And by original,
I know, I do I kind of feel that a lot of people would have problems with that, because I don't think that that's a very well established fact. Also, that one of the stories came from the Dashrath Jatak,
but I would imagine it's common knowledge,
well, because I think that because Ramayana kind of spread across more countries and it was more readily accepted by different nations, I think that it's kind of seen as India's cultural kind of epic export. So I don't think that a lot of people would, but yeah, I don't think that it's people would be as readily accepting of the fact that it might have come from the Dashrath Jatak. There's some contestation about that as well. So I think that's another topic that we should not get into right now.
But yes, so okay, so I think that one of the reasons that it irks them so much is I have no idea, other than what you have said on why it irks them. I don't know why the Hindutvas are irked by Mahabharata or being a Buddhist text and anything. I would like to end. I think I should have an answer for that. I just don't. But I would like to end with one observation about the Mahabharata. It's that I don't think, right, all this entire hagiography that the Mahabharata has as this great text, this widely complex text, it's a jumla. That's my opinion on the Mahabharata. Okay, it's not very good, but that's my opinion on this, right?
You're setting yourself up for another Twitter play.
No. I don't find the Mahabharata very complex. I don't find it very engaging. I think it has use for it. I'm not dismissing that. There's somebody who said the Mahabharata is basically two mafia gangs fighting for property in NCR. Okay, so I think I'm not going there. Okay, I think that it has meaning for people, right? People have written the Mahabharata, they have taken ballads for it. Mahabharata has been later a Bhakti text. People have, and we know, right? Like the Uriya, the Bangla dissensions, the things we have read, people have found utility in the text. I'm not denying anybody that. But I do think a lot of the Mahabharata's greatness is manufactured. How the way we see the Mahabharata as this great, enormously complicated text that has so much to offer. I find that to be a very bad advertisement that has started from the 19th century and is 18th century, really late 18th century, that's still going on. I don't find the text very compelling, right? But people do, and people have a misplaced sense of pride about the text, Hindu pride about that text.
Yeah, it also kind of gets us to the point that what are the texts that you're not proud about, and then what are the texts that you're proud about, because there's so many other compositions other than just. But even before I just want to quickly say this thing that sometimes Mahabharata has been called the fifth Veda, and that
Mm-hmm.
has been a pre-colonial kind of a notion too.
Yeah.
So there is that kind of legacy, but I don't know how widespread that idea was. But I think that this approach to the Mahabharata that we are seeing in contemporary times is, as you've correctly pointed out, a very post 19th century idea in which everything is being verbatim taken um, as an account of history,
Hmm.
as it actually and really transpired. And I think that is the newness in kind of the conversations around Mahabharata.
Yeah.
But I'm not kind of denying that it had a legacy in the past, even
Mm-hmm.
before colonial rule. But I do think that something has shifted in the colonial period. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, and in astronomical dating, you were looking at those periodicals, the Bangla periodicals, where there is this thing about what was that periodical called, where we had these astronomical dating things. That somebody came to the conclusion that it's 1500 BCE. I don't know what periodical you were saying.
I okay, so there's a lot of literature over that, and especially because the Ramayana is kind of seen as the Ramayana is seen as an account of geography. Uh, if I had to put it like this, I would say that Ramayana is seen as an account of geography of Bharat's eternal kind of space, and and the Mahabharata becomes an account of history. So the more you can push it back in the case of Mahabharat,
Mm,
the kind of the better it is. And in the case of Ramayana, you have the more you can kind of like
mm.
encompass a world and you can just like spread out, then better it is for the epic's legacy right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, but there has been kind of, I don't know, I feel that the craziest information I've read that it's 20,000 years ago or something.
Wait, who said that?
I think
that's
some kind of
that's
like fictional novelist, I would assume. But I just don't know who said that. But someone kind of wished it even kind of pre the copper age and stuff. So,
yeah.
so you have, see again, that kind of, it brings us to that entire loop of why people like to believe in fantastical accounts of things, fantastical histories. But that's a larger conversation.
Yeah,
Um,
I think we are over an hour now. So I think
yeah, we should kind of end it over here for today.
yes.
And
So what's
thank
our
you for,
plug-in?
huh?
What's our plug? What's our plug for the ending? So like, subscribe. What do people say in YouTube? The kids say all the good stuff. What is that?
So, like, subscribe, and share for more content. And if you kind of like, if you want to support us and our work, and we appreciate all your support and your feedback. So, make sure to leave respectful comments because we would be reading through it. Uh,
We should
I
disable
think that's,
comments. If we get too much comments, we'll disable it. Okay, or not. Maybe we'll read. Um, so yes, we will try to do another episode next week.
yeah. Let's see
Um, how
how it
if at
goes.
all people watch it. Otherwise, it's just us talking, which I don't mind. So it's not that. So thank you for watching, and we will see you guys next time. Any final words?
Bye bye. Take care of your health and don't get angry over Twitter posts.
And okay, yes, peace and may the force be with you. Is that an ending? Okay, bye.
Bye.